Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's extended 90-minute episode of Talking DTC with Bob Ehrlich. Today's episode will be on campaign launches. For our attendees, if you have any questions for our panelists, please submit them through the Q&A feature located in the bottom center of your Zoom window, and we'll answer as many as time permits throughout the discussion or near the end of the panel. Our panelists joining Bob today are Jim Joseph, President of North America with McCann Health; Kathleen Nanda, Chief Creative Officer with FCB Health New York; Susan Perlbach, Chief Creative Officer of InTouch Group; Audrey Reichenberg, Chief Creative Officer of Health with VML Y&R; James Tallarico, President and Executive Creative Director with Heartbeat; and Lori Thatch, Head of Strategy with Fingerpaint. With that, I will turn things over to our Chairman and CEO to welcome everyone, and then allow our panelists to introduce themselves before we get the discussion underway. Bob?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talking DTC. Switch to our gallery view here so I can see you all. Thank you very much. Now I can see everybody. Great day to be here and talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the whole start of DTC, the start of the DTC process for new product launches. I want, if we can take 30 seconds for each of you to just introduce yourself and say where you're from, and I appreciate it. We have a big group today. So let's start with Jim, my old friend Jim Joseph.
Good to see you, Bob. Thank you. Yes, I'm Jim Joseph. I am the President of North America for McCann Health, and excited to be here today to talk about my favorite topic. So thanks, Bob.
Sure. Kathleen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Nanda. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at FCB Health New York, and thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. Thank you. So, Susan?
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Perlbach, Chief Creative Officer at InTouch Group.
Okay, Augie?
Hi, I'm Audrey Reichenberg. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at VML Y&R in New York. And today talking to you from the basement of a dear friend because all of our internet went out in the neighborhood.
Oh,
hello.
Wow. All right, Lori?
Hi, I'm Lori Thatch, and I head strategy at Fingerpaint in Saratoga.
Okay, James?
How's it going, everybody? I'm James Tallarico. I'm the president at Heartbeat. I'm also responsible for our creative group as the ECD. I'm also at a friend's house, but I'm out on their porch because the kids are going crazy inside.
Okay, well, that's terrific. Nice to have all 6 of you. We have an hour and a half, and we promise to be done exactly by 3, in case anybody has somewhere to go. I want to start with the whole COVID situation and how you see the macro picture in terms of new product launches. I guess my question is, has COVID changed anything that we would do or the drug companies might do in launching new products? Start with Jim.
Sure. I think it absolutely has changed on a couple different dimensions. A lot of what we talked about pre-COVID that was kind of bubbling on the surface in our industry and with innovation, I think came to life over COVID to our benefit. If there's any kind of benefit that comes out of it, it is in a couple areas for our industry. One is innovative ways to find care and different places to go to get information, to get care, to get guidance, to get advice. We've seen alternate channels pop up all over the place that suddenly are just as credible as going to your doctor's office. Something we had talked about before, pharmacy just being one of them, suddenly legitimate and frequent and respected. And just the role of science and people's understanding of science and their aptitude for it and wanting to investigate it and understand it and how it relates to them, I think completely changes how we now go to market with a new product with that in mind.
Okay, Kathleen?
Yeah, I would agree. What we're seeing actually with some of our clients is that they're noticing that there are people who previously, especially those with ongoing chronic illnesses, really haven't taken care of their health. They stayed home, but stopped seeing physicians, of course, and going to the pharmacy. And so our clients are sometimes turning to us now and saying, you know, what can we do about that? So we found that very fascinating as well. We've also seen tremendous changes, of course, in everything else from telehealth onwards, and our clients are very, very aware of that.
Okay.
And yeah, I think it's been a hugely exciting opportunity for us across the board because traditionally health has taken a little while to embrace change. And we had this massive disruption and everybody had to embrace change at the same time. And I think that gives us safety and comfort in numbers a bit because we're all moving in the same direction at the same pace, which is great. And then creatively, I think, you know, all the creatives on this call would agree, we have taken on production in ways that we never thought we could do. And that has been, it's going to have huge ramifications in how we move forward and what we make and how we make it, how quickly we can make it, where we can make it, who is making it. And that's going to untether us for the long term, I think, in a good way.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to Susan.
Yeah, the only thing I love all of these answers. It's interesting to hear them. The only thing I think I would add is that what I'm hearing from clients is actually, believe it or not, a bigger interest in DTC. And I think because obviously people aren't proactively seeing a physician, so trying to create interest there. And also a tremendous amount of web traffic, I think occurred. And folks going to websites has spiked. So there's also been, I think, greater demand for websites that both inform more and honestly do more.
Mm-hmm. Jim? James? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry. I'm having a little trouble hearing you, my friend. But
everybody else hear me, or is it just James?
It's a little muffled.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know how to change that.
No worries. That said, you know, it's funny to say the following thing after such an incredibly difficult year, but I am so excited as to where the industry has shifted. You know, Jim mentioned it, Kathleen mentioned it. The idea that DTC is television is so far a thing of the past. You know, it's wonderful. We need to be engaging with our audiences, and particularly our consumer audiences, across any platform that's available to them. They are reaching out for more information. They are looking to gut check, and they're taking that information into the doctor's office, not just to ask about a drug or about a treatment, but to have a real conversation with docs, and not physically, but online. They can move from getting that information to a digital health interaction with a doc to a prescription. And that's fast, that's informed. I haven't been this excited since I started in healthcare.
Wow, okay, Lori?
Yeah, actually, I was going to start by almost apologetically saying this was an unintended consequence of COVID, but it sounds like everybody's there. We actually launched a prescription digital therapeutic right before COVID. So to see the way that that was embraced and that it set up this DTC opportunity, this virtual end-to-end experience for people, it obviously was boosted by COVID. I don't think that's going anywhere though. And I think that it opened up a whole new world of what you could do when people can self-serve, and that kind of self-reliance that they could do, going from like a virtual telehealth model right into a PDT, and it was all in their hands. So it's very interesting.
It's so cool that you had that.
Go ahead.
It's so interesting you had that on the table before COVID, Lori. You know, I do think that, you know, a big disruption like this motivates or catalyzes themes and trends that are just below the surface. And then they really come to fruition. I think we're seeing a lot of that.
Yep.
Do you think consumers and patients or potential patients are more receptive now to DTC messaging than they were before?
I think they have, they have a much higher opinion of the pharma industry now. I think they understand the importance of science. But also they've realized that technology really does play an enormous part in their lives. And so speaking to patients along the whole continuum of their journey has become more important than ever before. Connected health experiences is really sort of the way of the future. It's not just what a brand is saying to a patient right now. It's what a brand is really doing for a patient right now. So that their whole experience around the journey, from the moment they're diagnosed right through to the moment that, you know, they are on the drug and hopefully working well with it long term, at every juncture, we need to speak to them in a very, very personalized way. Mass marketing in a way has gone the way of the dinosaur. This is all about very, very personalized care at every juncture in the way that people want it. We've been talking about that for a long time, but for the first time, certainly at VMLY&R, we're doing that on a sort of a daily basis and bringing our clients into the fold because it's fairly new for some of them.
Okay.
And I think much more receptive to self-care all along that journey, as you say, much more receptive to understand the options, understand the science, brand names, manufacturer names. We've never seen such awareness around that either. So much more receptive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the interesting things that COVID has done for patients in general is it's turned everyone into a seeker of information in ways that they never were before. So the past year, people were hungry for health information. They turned to the internet, they turned to any news source they can get. And I'm hoping that they got pretty good at it, better than they were before. And they know where to look and they know how to look for things. And we've all heard the stories of trying to get a vaccine appointment and seeing how engaged people were. And if you weren't digitally savvy, how you got left behind. We are putting so much information and content in digital mediums. But one of the things we do have to keep in mind is that there is a digital divide in certain areas, especially when you're talking about elderly patients or conditions that do hit older patients. And that was a fascinating thing to be reminded of while everything was happening so quickly in COVID, and watching certain populations get left behind because they didn't have access to the technology that everybody else did. So that's something we're very cognizant of as we move forward in all the things that we're creating at FCB Health. We have to make sure that we are casting a wide enough net and making sure that equality for all the information and the quality of information getting to people is going to be evenly distributed.
Okay.
A really
I've
great point.
seen over the years that DTC seems to have become accepted as a form of communication for almost every category, every therapeutic category. Where in the beginning it was for the large categories, and we kind of used targeted media for cancer drugs or anything that had a fairly low incidence. And now it seems that everybody's doing DTC. I don't care what the drug category is. I'm just wondering, why do we see that trend? Because we keep talking about personalized marketing and one-to-one marketing, and yet we see DTC explode into categories that none of us would have thought possible 10 years ago, let's say. That, we'd be doing these broad campaigns for drugs. And I know a lot of it has to do with the price of the drug, and you don't need that many patients. And, I understand the economics of it. But can some of you just comment on this use of DTC that seems to now be for everybody? There's no brand that can't use DTC or couldn't use DTC.
Right. You're totally right, of course. In the world of oncology years ago, no one would ever have done DTC for chemotherapy. But now with the targeted therapies and immunotherapy and what's coming along next, which will be gene therapies, it's amazing how much people have realized that you need to speak to patients that they have a choice. So you can empower them and educate them a little bit about what's really available there. And it's really, it helps wake up everyone to the fact that there are new medicines on the market all the time. DTC has always been there to educate the consumer. So not to say I have to have a drug, but just to at least engage the physician in a conversation about it and say, I heard about this. What do you think about it? Is this appropriate for my use? And so at least that conversation can happen. DTC facilitates that conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I think that facilitation is absolutely necessary. Like, we want to have relationships with the people with whom our brands and our drugs are most benefiting. So the idea that, oncology is a new venue, absolutely. But I think in the culture, we are seeing a broad population, even older generations, even the disenfranchised, as they gain more access. Information is necessary to be empowered to make decisions. And that's what we want, I think, all of us, on behalf of all of our patients. Mm-hmm. Good decisions for better health. It might not be the drug that we represent, but if we can empower them to make a healthy decision, I think that is the best that we can do as a community.
And I would actually say that the proliferation of DTC has been explosive. I would completely agree. And I think it's because of the changing media landscape. And I think you even mentioned in your question the idea of addressable targeting. And I I've had conversations with clients lately where, you know, this is not a scattershot approach anymore. The way that, you know, you can drill down to have the conversation with the consumer is incredible. And I think addressable targeting is the bomb. And the other thing I think is that the possibilities within that are endless. I mean, truly infinite. So the ability to basically connect with someone on digital video and then be able to hit them with a different message online and know what they have seen before. I mean, the amount that you can basically influence them along the journey is incredible. So I think that's had a big impact on the proliferation of DTC.
Mhm.
And let's face it, DTC used to mean massive budgets, blockbuster drug. That's what it meant. And that's how it started. So anything that didn't sort of fit that very narrow criteria just was off the table. That doesn't ring true anymore. Big budget is not necessary. In fact, if anything, efficient budget is what's necessary. Micro-targeted budget, that's what's necessary. So that just opens up the whole field. There's nobody left out now. And to James's point, you know, an engaged patient is a patient that gets healthier.
I think when you think about where we ultimately want those patients to go, I think there's a change on the other end of it as well with HCPs. We all kind of used to put the filter on it where it was like, well, if the patient's going to pitch, we have to make sure the physician's going to catch, right? And we kind of, I think that used to be a lot narrower. I think the days of physicians, you know, with the kind of condescending Dr. Google type way of talking about their patients, that they too have had to evolve to be more open to it. And it's become more and more effective to activate consumers.
Okay. So we've established that every category can have DTC. We've seen that, and you agree that that's been made possible, I guess, by some of the techniques that we can use, or for also the changing consumer landscape as far as receptivity to health information. Let's take a step back now, and if you were advising clients, is there a minimum budget you need to be in DTC? I mean, can a small company still do it effectively? Or is there some level where you say, you know, I'm talking DTC, I'm talking about consumer television and print and digital. Are there situations, and how would you advise clients? If I'm a drug company, I'm coming to you with a new drug, and there's going to be a proliferation of genomic drugs coming out. And, I mean, it's going to be amazing what's going to happen over the next 10 years. But a lot of them are fairly small companies, heavily in debt. Probably less resistant, probably less willing to spend $30 or $40 million and take a big risk. So I'm just wondering, what advice do you give clients now about, can I do DTC? Should I do DTC? Where do you start in that discussion?
There's never been a better time for a challenger brand or a challenger product to get into DTC. Never. Between the upfront research, the data that we have available to us to know who that audience is, the partnerships that we develop for Heartbeat, it's internal. We have a media group through our integrated 100% integration model that everyone's at the table to identify where those consumers are, how can we best access them? And there are so many different platforms at price points and engagement models that, frankly, like, I struggle to think of, like, if you're willing to make hard decisions about who you want to talk with, that you can't get to.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think probably everyone on this call understands that the days of blockbuster drugs are over. And I mean, I even hate saying the word TV anymore, because I don't think we mean linear TV when we say it. And I think everything is scalable, everything. And I can't emphasize enough. I mean, there are rare disease drugs that I think can be doing digital video, that can have DTC concepts out there. So I think it's just a matter of finding that right media mix and targeting the right people.
And I think traditionally, from what we've seen creatively, the big budgets always went to media for these accounts. And, the creative budgets have been very manageable. And we're finding that we're still creating these great things. It's just that the media budgets have changed so much because of what everyone's saying, the different platforms, that you can still create quality materials. You just don't need $100 million media buy to reach all the folks that you want to reach. So it's been really great to see that while budgets have come down and ROI can go up, we're still able to have these great pieces of work that are still being funded, and we're still being able to chop them up, cut them up, edit them, turn them into whatever they need to be turned into to live successfully on all the different media channels that we have.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
And-
that's so true. In social, we can actually work with a very small budget and have a phenomenal reach. If the idea itself is really strong and really connects with individuals, it's tremendous what you can do. And social allows you to have multiple messages going at once. It can also be a very inexpensive way of actually producing the work itself. And even on TikTok, which is just, a very brand new platform, which is now starting to reach a greater audience than Facebook or even Instagram combined at this point. I think the future looks amazing for DTC.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob, it's interesting. Your question was, what do we tell clients when they ask how much money do they need? I think what everybody's saying is, let's look at the data. Look at the data, and then we can decide.
Right. So where do you start? Let's say I'm a company that has a drug that's about to be approved in the next year, let's say. And I come and I'm looking for an agency and I'm looking for advice and when to start the DTC process. How soon should I start? And let's just pick a time. I've got a drug that I'm confident will be approved in a year. When should I come to an agency and start doing the creative development and all the pre-planning that we need to do to get a commercial on air, let's say 6 months after launch? When should I come to you?
Did you say launching in a year? I'm like,
I'm
come
late.
2 years
You're telling me
ago.
I'm late.
And that's what I was going to say too.
Let's
Too
step
late.
back. Let's say, I don't know, I'm going to get approved sometime. When should I think about coming to you? How soon before I think I'm going to be approved should I come to find an agency and start this discussion about whether I do DTC, how I do DTC, what's the creative process, what research do you need, all that other stuff?
I would struggle to put an exact date on it, but probably, again, everybody on this call is going to say the earlier, the better. And the other thing I think of, when answering that question is, I don't think all disease states are created equal in that regard. So if you are working on a mass market drug, cholesterol, tons of people know about it. There's a lot of data out there, and you're going to be able to get smart pretty quickly. If it happens to be a drug that is a brand new disease state, you're going to need to do all kinds of probably disease state marketing, market shaping information. The other thing is, I'm specifically thinking of an example of, I worked on what ultimately ended up being a first to market female sexual dysfunction drug. And as you can imagine, at the time, there was absolutely nothing out there. And so I think we started working on that almost 4 years out, because just so much groundwork had to be laid. I mean, even creating connected conversations between, consumers and HCPs. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the earlier the better, but it's tough to put an exact, date on that.
I would agree. I think early is good. You really just want to make sure that you have sufficient time, that if you have the data and you can dig into it, marvelous. If not, what you really want to do is research, really get to know your target audience. Ethnographic research was dropped a long time ago because it takes longer, it costs more, but it's still so superior to having 12 people in a room doing a focus group or Zooming in a focus group where one person can contaminate the rest of the group with an opinion. Much better to do one-on-ones ethnographically in someone's backyard, so that you can really get a feel for who they are and what they're going through. And only when you understand exactly what their experience is, can you really map out your strategy for any DTC, because again, you want that whole health experience to be brilliant all the way through, and you want to be able to connect with them at every point during that journey. The only way you can really do that in an effective way is to know your audience as well as you almost know yourself. That's easier said than done, because of course everyone could be so different. Then one last thing is, if it's a rare disease, you really need to spend some time finding those individuals, because there's sometimes very, very few of them and they're hard to find. And there's some amazing technology out there today that can help us pinpoint where those particular individuals and their families may be. And in those cases, I mean, we haven't spoken about caregivers yet, but caregivers do play a very large role in DTC as well. As we all know, sometimes our parents might not go to see the doctor soon enough, but we'll maybe push them to go check on that thing that's sort of worrying them. So I went off on a tangent there, but we didn't mention caregivers, and that's a part of DTC.
Yeah, and I think in fact caregivers like need to be considered as part of our consumers when we're thinking about it. There are many disease states where the caregiver is the decision maker, particularly in rare diseases. And I love the idea that we're asking questions. I think we all assume that you're going to do DTC like in some form or another. Like I think that relationship with the consumer is so important, whether it's caregiver or actual patient. But those questions, once we have these learnings, how complex is my story? How complex is this disease state? What is the need base of this audience, and how can I enjoin that need base and start the dialogue with the audience? How ingrained are the behaviors? You know, if there's a new drug on the market, it's never been discussed, starting 4 years out is probably really, really smart. So I think Susan's example is a great one. But if it is really prominent, it's right in the window and there's a need immediately, maybe not as long. So knowing the questions that you're going to ask with the knowledge base that you gain from digital research, ethnographic research, and particularly close relationship with the media team, like knowing where folks are getting information, how they're engaging their digital assets, that is going to be so important.
And I think back in the day, we had to think about the HCP first, and we would map out the HCP, and then we could wait a year to think about consumer. I think that's gone. I think it's concurrent. The minute you're starting to think about how you're going to go to market, regardless of the constituent, you think about the consumer, because that knowledge, to what everybody's talking about, that knowledge is actually going to help you with the other constituents. In fact, I don't know how you do it without that knowledge. So it should start concurrently. There should no longer be this like gap where you worry about the patient or the consumer later.
And I think, we all crave the insights and the research and, these roomy, amazing timelines. And sometimes we're lucky and we get 4 years, and sometimes we get 9 months, and you make it work, So I think that when you've been doing this for a while, you can kind of work on any timeline. It's just how deep do you go? How wide do you go? And, the more efficient you can be, the better, I think. And one of the things we always try to remind folks is there's pre-clearing and then there's non-pre-clearing. Some clients aren't even pre-clearing if they want to get in market in a hurry. And that can save you a few months if you're a small company and you don't have a huge budget. Maybe you're a one product company, and you need to get that asset out into the market, and you don't have 4 years and you don't have a budget that's huge, So I think going back to what we were talking about earlier is the market dynamics have changed so much that it's giving everybody a shot at being really effective in DTC marketing, because you don't have to invest so much time and money. You can choose a path that's not the traditional network spot, that's going to have to be trafficked and going to have to be produced at a certain level. There's lots of ways that we can get you to a really good place with a smaller budget on a tighter timeline. Is it ideal? No, it's not always ideal, but I think all of us have been in this business a while. Our ideals have changed over the years. We used to have the luxury of time, and now with everyone moving so quick and we're in a constant agile optimization model, we're able to do things much faster than we were ever able to do them.
Kathleen, I love that answer, because you're right. And it goes back to everything is scalable. And I think, again, we've all been humbled by a timeline, right? But we're not ever going to say no. We are going to make it work. And again, even doing shoots during COVID and, covering shoots remotely. We're going to make it happen. We can do anything, but we're still going to tell you we want to start early.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, we've had TV now for about 24 years, I think, or 97. What are the things that you've learned or you've observed that I'm a client who wants to launch a drug? Are there any things that you would say, wow, we've learned, don't do this in terms of type of creative? Or, is there anything that you could say has, 24 years experience that this is the thing we must do that we've learned over the years to be successful?
I think go deeper. I think, when we first started out, the insights, the benefits were largely functional, largely claim oriented. And that worked at the time because it was the first time we were kind of talking directly to consumers. But I think what we've learned through the years is that we got to go a lot deeper, and we got to learn a lot more, and we got to really figure out, how can this drug add value to the person's life, all along the entire journey that they're first engaging to when they have a positive outcome. How can we add value? How can we deeply, deeply, deeply add value? I think that's what we've learned, is that the product claim, the awareness campaign, the functional benefits, that's not enough anymore. We got to go deeper.
The emotional insight is absolutely key. Without it, you really don't have very much to go on long term. That's going to be so important. I think that one of the other things that we really know that our clients need to think about is keeping this idea simple enough, and helping them understand the science in a very simple manner. By no means talking down to anyone, but keeping it clean and simple. The sort of double talk when there's too much copy in there that sometimes has been given to us. We have to find ways to simplify that copy so it's not overly scientific and is speaking in a really human language and very human way.
I think adding on to that too, I think people's expectations of how they experience a brand have really changed and become so much more sophisticated that it's not only simple, it's trying to live up to what people expect when they interact with the brand. And I don't think our business is any different now. I think that we need to be right there with them. I think one of the things you said, Jim, about the prioritization of patients, I think we rarely see anymore we have HCP positioning and, oh, by the way, make that right for patients or make that right for consumers, or how would you make that work for consumers? Thank goodness, I think over the last probably 10 or 15 years, that has really changed, and consumers are definitely a priority, and we think about them first, right along with the HCP, which I think is...
It's interesting what you all say. I'm just curious because just watching TV ads as I do, a lot of it does look the same. A lot of what I see, I could say that could have been run in 1997. Not that it's a bad ad, but I'm looking at the beach scenes and the similar stuff that probably DTC started with, and I'm just wondering, is it some of the ads I see are very, very, I would say are very creative. I don't know, I can't judge effectiveness because I don't see the data, but I can judge creativity, or at least the kind of things that you're describing, all about deep depth with the consumer and emotional attachment, things like that. So there are ads that stand out for that. And then there are ads that look pretty similar to what they've always been, vignette ads with a lot of copy and a lot of claims and a lot of fair balance and, what required. But I mean, it just seems like it's the same. So I'm just wondering what your reaction is to my statement that there's still a lot of sameness, I think, in much of what I see on television.
I agree. And I think there is more DTC advertising on television than there ever has been. And, 10 years ago, just being a health brand on television put you in sort of a different realm than some of the other stuff that was on air. But just like in any creative field, you have to come to a place that's unique, or else you're not going to get noticed. And, one of the things we always talk about is you can create a very nice piece of work, but it may be invisible. It may be safe, it may not do any harm, but no one's going to notice it. No one's going to remember it. And, we have to hold ourselves to a standard, I think, in creativity that's higher, because some of the messages we're delivering can change someone's life. And if our message is invisible or looks just like everything else, people just tune out and they don't digest it. And when I think back on some of the spots that have stood out, Aj, I love the Spriva elephant, and Susan, the Pradaxa fish. And, I think back to those early Lipitor commercials that had a sense of humor to them, the belly flop in the pool. And there was humanity, and there was high production value, and there was really smart insights. And we just launched something for, a very modest budget, but it has a jingle and it's fun and it's got a sense of humor and it's irreverent and it uses cool character animation. And you're trying to get to a place where people are going to stop and say, oh my gosh, that's not just informative, but it's entertaining. And I think we can challenge ourselves with that.
But why does it happen? We all these big companies do a significant amount of testing, qualitative, quantitative. They go to these agencies, these testing bureaus that have a lot of normative data. I'm just wondering, if you're producing invisible advertising, why would that happen with all today's techniques? Because I got to say, honestly, I see it. I mean, I see a lot of invisible advertising, and I watch it, and I say, yeah, you have a nice jingle and all that, but it just goes out. It's just not compelling, in my opinion. But yet these companies all have very good testing companies. They have good agencies. So please explain to me then why it would happen in today's world when you're told you have to be better and yet you're the same. And I assume it tested well. So is it a problem with the testing? Is it a problem with risk taking? Give me some ideas as to why we still would have sameness in launch advertising.
I wonder if some of the questions that we're asking of our audiences, whether in testing or with our clients, need to be shifted. Oftentimes we're asking about positivity, the feelings towards a particular piece of creative. Like, I'm most curious about whether it's transforming opinions. Does it shift your view of something? Does it stay with you? Do you see yourself in it? Do you recognize something in it? Like, those, I think, are really potent questions. And when we go with broad, sweeping, $200 million media campaigns that are just beating you down with television, you're going to remember it because you're annoyed by it. But if you don't have that particularly, and if you want to break away from that, it really comes by asking different questions and knowing that audience and being courageous.
Yeah,
I also think it's a.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Lori. Go ahead.
I think there is some lack of risk taking. I think one thing with us and with clients, but I think in testing, this idea of getting comfortable with discomfort. People aren't necessarily going to like what you're showing them, especially if it's a new idea. And I think we try to smooth over the friction and it waters down where we land. And that's ultimately, we're trying to think, what is the one you're going to think about on your drive home? Not which one did you like? And I think that that takes a lot of coaching with clients and all of us to be comfortable that people aren't going to be like, that's awesome. They may not feel that way yet. But
I don't know if our research techniques then misleading us that we get good scores in a quantitative test for advertising, and yet it comes out to be a same ad. So I'm just wondering, is that a function of the research? Is it a function of what? I mean, I'm still mystified at some of the stuff that comes out that I would say is pretty bland.
I would ask all of us here on the panel, have we recently or at any point had a piece of creative go into testing and get improved by it?
That is an amazing question.
and I'm not even saying you have to answer it because get us all into hot water or something.
Rhetorical question, yeah.
It's kind of yes.
Well, let me ask you, OJ. You have the turkey ads for Chantix, correct?
Yes, we do.
And those are very unusual ads that I cannot imagine were easy to convince the client that, why don't you go with an animated turkey talking about your smoking cessation product. So I'm just wondering, now all of you have done good ads too, but that's the one that comes to mind since I know you're from the agency that did it. How do you get an ad like that's so different to be accepted or to test it, so that a client would say, yeah, I'll take a chance, versus the typical vignette of users of Chantix who stopped smoking? And, I know you had Ray Liotta, you've had everything, the celebrity, the vignettes, and now you went to the turkey. So tell me how that could happen.
Well, it can happen when you have a great champion of a client and you have a client who's not so afraid. Great work doesn't happen without a great client. I think we all know this. Some clients are just not willing to take risks. Others, they understand when there's a risk here, but this is a calculated one. Slow Turkey was really based on not only an insight into the audience, but in this case was an insight into the actual product itself and what it's like to actually try to give up smoking. The product itself works very simply. It helps to reduce the urge to smoke. And therefore, it is naturally something that slows something down. It reduces something. And it was a matter of a wonderful writer, not me, who came up with this idea of it's not quitting cold turkey, it's slow turkey. And it just kind of fit. Fortunately, because of things like the elephant that we did for Spiriva, it was not the first time an animal had been used in advertising in pharmaceuticals. So it wasn't a completely strange idea. But the beauty of this was also the craftsmanship, which is something we haven't touched on that much, because we do have clients who have, small budgets, very little time to get something out, and great production values do take a little bit more time and care, but it can make a huge difference. With Slow Turkey, the beauty of that work was not only the insight into the audience, the insight into the product, but ultimately that wonderful turkey that was brought to life, because turkeys are kind of ugly, but we made him rather charming and adorable, and actually invented some new things that even the Pixar people were excited about, because he had, and we found out a turkey has over 400 different kinds of reticulated feathers. And so this was not an easy thing to bring to life if we wanted to do it well. But we took the time and the effort to do that. But honestly, thanks to the client in this case. They were behind us and supporting it all the way. So good clients everywhere, thank you, because without you, our best work does not see the light of day.
Absolutely.
I also think we have to remember, this is a cop-out answer a little bit, but this is just as much art as science. And we have to remember that. And a point that Lori made a minute ago, gross generalization, but clients want breakthrough, but they want it to be proven ahead of time, which those are incongruous. It's impossible to do that if you're going to have breakthrough. And sometimes breakthrough isn't as easily tested either, but that's the art. So we have to remember there is an art here, and there is an element of unpredictability no matter how well you've tested it. And if you're doing something truly breakthrough, it might not be so easy to test.
And we're all looking to
Is it harder that you're dealing with an industry of science? If you were dealing with the cosmetic industry, obviously it might be easier to stretch the envelope. Is that a barrier that we're a science industry and doing advertising, which you say may be art? And
I think it's more, I've worked across a gazillion industries, healthcare, non-healthcare. I think it's more, to Aj's point, it's more client mindset. There are many, many clients in healthcare that are deeply rooted in science, but they're willing to take risks. They're willing to take a leap. They're willing to go out there. And I've also met many clients that are in highly emotional categories like beauty who won't make a move without data. So I think it's more mindset related. The organization they work for, I'm sure, has a lot to do with it also in terms of what's expected of them. But I think it's more client mindset than anything.
I have a theory a little bit on this too, which is that I think a lot of times everything starts to look the same because there's this thought that somehow it needs to look legit. So it's breakthrough, but within this box, you still want to fit in that box. And I think that is a mindset. And I think, a great example of how this could, really work if you're willing to step out of that box. I always use the Oscar insurance example. And I think that, in the insurance category, it was like these old staid companies have been around for 100 years talking about heritage and all that. And Oscar walked in and just flipped that industry on its head. And I'm sure that was really uncomfortable for people like New Kid on the Block. Maybe we should try to be legitimate and, compete with like the old staid and, true. But that really worked out for them. But I guess, it's just a matter of, are you willing to take that risk and maybe feel like it's, not as legit as other ads might look.
The question that we're always asking internally is like, what is it going to take for our creative communication to motivate behavior change? We are asking for people to do something, to go talk to a doctor. And even on the HCP side, we're asking doctors to shift they're thinking. And I think we all know how ingrained in certain behaviors and assumptions docs can be. So often you have to push even more proactively. And that means a provocation. And sometimes that comes from delight. So like you are provoked to action because it's delightful, or it totally gets. Sometimes you're provoked to action because you're made to feel a little bit uncomfortable, or the creative is a little unusual. And those are qualities that someone, I forget, on the panel just before, was talking about how comfortable are we with these different qualities of our campaigns, qualities of our communication. And what does that mean when we get back to the brand?
And I think that's really important. And some of that can be proven in testing if we ask the right questions. And if we think about how much our industry has changed, how much media has changed, how much production has changed, how much our timelines have changed, testing has kind of stayed the same. It hasn't changed that much. It is very similar to what it has been. And I'm intrigued to think about disruption coming to our testing process, because we have all changed the way we do things, changed the way we talk to people, changed the kind of things we serve them, but we all still make a rectangle and go into market research and get a bunch of different questions asked in the same, Tenafly, New Jersey, Orlando, Florida. I mean, we've all been on the circuit, right? You can exactly what these conference rooms look like. And that I think is something that will probably start to shift, I hope, in the future, and sort of catch up to where we're all going and have been.
My favorite testing question was for an RA ad, and the audience was asked, does this look like an RA ad?
Yeah, so that's a positive. Huh?
Legit, that's what I'm saying. They want to be legit.
Yeah.
So how much, if I'm doing launch advertising, with everything you know and everything you feel, how important is it to be different? To say, no, we're not doing vignettes with a beat scene, or, I mean, just, what things would you advise a client? Because, if they're a fairly big company with a fairly big budget, they're going to do television, and, they're going to do the normal things. How important would you say it is that, hey, you got to really be careful that you don't launch the invisible ad, even though it may test well under today's test technique? How do you do that?
It's very, very important. You can't be invisible. Safe isn't safe, right? You have to have something that's going to stand out in that sea of sameness. You have to. And it doesn't mean do something different for the sake of it. Everything that we do, everyone on this panel would never do that. We make sure that everything that we do will make absolute sense. But when something gets neutered down, and that neutering down usually happens in the research process with the advertising, something always kind of gets lost, missing. They smooth off the edges of an idea. And it's sometimes the edge of the idea that cuts through. That's what we're really hoping to give to our clients, is something that is true and cuts through. Otherwise, they're in that safe place that Kathleen was talking about. And then when you're invisible, you've just blown your entire budget, as far as I'm concerned. It's done you no good.
Right. But you have about 28 seconds, I would say, in the average ad to do a brand story. And
20. It's 20
seconds.
20.
28, 26.
Yeah.
Of a 60-second ad, anywhere from 20 seconds to 30 seconds probably to make your point. I'm just wondering, when you get to the practical realm of being different, so how do you be different in those 20 seconds? And when you have to put a lot of information in those 20 seconds, and the indication and the key benefit of the brand, and it's very difficult, I guess. And is that one reason that people end up with sameness, because you have to throw things in, and that kind of dilutes your creative ability to focus on one important thing.
There are definitely constraints on the fair balance side, but we're still talking about TV. Like, what is it that surrounds this ad? The full spectrum of placements identified with the media department, with like your media partners. We have media in-house at Heartbeat, so it's just like, used to be a walk down the hall, now it's a Teams chat. But like, what is the full environment that I'm discussing in, and where can I be a little bit more provocative? Okay. Where can I be a little bit more playful?
But
what is
60%
a longer
of your budget is generally TV, 58%, something like that, is actually spent on television. So the majority of what you spend is going to be on television. Even no matter what you surround yourself with, you're still spending a lot in the average brand on television, and generally in the same buying television in the same place that other DTC ads are buying television. So you're kind of crowded around other DTC ads as well. So
I think the issue isn't being different, though. I think it's being relevant, and as Osh said, breakthrough. I think you said cut through, breakthrough. And you can do that with an insight. You can do that with a technique. You can do that with a hook. You don't have to necessarily go to different. If I think, to Lori's point, different makes you not legitimate or questions your scientific credibility. I don't think it's necessarily different to be different. I think it's relevant and breakthrough. And I agree that the spending is at 58%, but I would agree. I would argue that the other, if I do my math, 42%. The other 42% is probably more convincing, though, and is more engaging and is more likely to change behavior. That it has to work, to James's point, has to work in conjunction with the advertising. But I think its influence has a far greater share of influence than necessarily just the TV. It's that all the stuff that you're doing, and those other things can make you feel more relevant, more breakthrough, differentiated versus other options.
I would find it intriguing if people started using TV, because honestly, you only get about 15 to 20 seconds, because although you think we have 30, you honestly don't want waterfall copy. What if TV was actually used to send you to those other mediums, to get you online, to push you into social, where you will get more of that information? And the other question is, why on earth aren't we using the other mediums that all of entertainment uses except us? Why are we not doing, for example, a Netflix documentary on a particular, clinical category, or perhaps an investigative series that's on Netflix that really gets deep into a particular disease area or illness? Why not then entice people to learn more by going to then the other places where they can learn then about the actual brand? Why are we just stuck with TV, the regular social, the brochure, etc., when there's so many other mediums on which we could be living and our clients could be thriving?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if you guys saw Modern Love a couple years ago, but there was an episode where there was a patient with bipolar. It was the most illuminating piece of, call it advertising for what it's like to live with bipolar. It was so compelling, so convincing, so heartwarming. It was the best episode in the whole series. And all I thought at the end was, why didn't a prescription drug do that? That it should have been completely tied to solutions.
Yep.
That's the kind of thinking I think we need to be generating.
And I think that's all coming. We are, I'm sure, seeing it all the time, talking about content. How are we creating content? And, health definitely moves at a slower pace than some of the other industries, for sure. But again, we're in this hugely disruptive moment, and we've had to think creatively about where we are and what we're doing and how we're talking to people, how they're engaging. So the appetite for that, I think, is there in a few places, but it is going to be a bit of a slow burn. According to my clients, their ROI is still top from TV. They still get a great ROI on television. And until that ROI is not there anymore, television is going to stick. And, the repurposing of television commercials to social media, to, cut-ups for the website, all that stuff has a lot of utility to it. So that is helping to increase the ROI tremendously. But that doesn't mean that we can't be thinking about other ways, that it has to be all of that. Because, Bob, as you were saying, there is a formula, and it starts to seem very formulaic. After a while, you see these spots, they open with a certain thing, then the journey, is slowly taken with some lifestyle shots, then the Fair Balance kicks in, then there's a little wrap up at the end, and we're out. And, it's not for lack of trying. I'm sure we've all been on the other end trying to find great ways in. And I think what Ash was talking about earlier with the cold turkey, slow turkey, you know, there's an articulated verbal language of television, but there's also a visual language going on as well. So yes, while you only have 22 seconds, 26 seconds, however long you have to get your messaging across, you have an entire visual language going on behind you. And that can be its own story. And that is where craft comes in and some differentiation comes in, shareability, connection. You know, we can't leave that on the cutting room floor. We have to think about that because it's far less regulated and limited. And it's a big opportunity for us to create something unique and beautiful and engaging.
And in that time, there's also the opportunity to build smaller narratives, really specific narratives. Instead of going broad and this halcyonic sunset or other things that we make fun of, the real specifics of functional benefits. And those things can be picked up and extended further when we move them into digital spaces or into social spaces. So definitely the cutting up, taking the core and then extending it further across different applications.
You said something interesting. You've also said something interesting about the role of TV versus other media, and that TV is kind of, I guess, to introduce and get very general thoughts out there, but a lot of your other media that you use kind of closes the deal, or adds detail or texture or nuance. Targeting, because one of the things I still see is basically one commercial. I mean, you're going to see one major commercial. You might see some pullouts. I know that Turkey has a lot of pullouts, but generally you're going to see one campaign with a few different versions of it, and then you're basically saying that you can take that and then really slice and dice it in different audiences and different media. You can go to YouTube, you can go to Netflix, as you said, Jim. There are ways to take your basic message and extend it or make it more impactful to the targeted groups. Is that a fair assumption that what the role of TV might be, or because it's still used? I mean, it's still the 800-pound gorilla in media is the television.
Yeah.
So.
And everything that Kathleen was saying is true, which is at least you do have 60 seconds of a visual story that does allow you to carry it further. But every time you talk about TV, I think about what happened over COVID. Everyone was pretty much stuck at home watching TV for the last year and a half. And what were they watching? And I'm going to bring up Netflix again. They're watching streaming video, streaming platforms. And of course, Netflix is only one of them. There's Amazon Prime, of course, and so on. I just can't for the life of me understand why my clients aren't screaming to go there, because look how much attention you can really get from your audience. Look how many hours they're spending watching. There could still be a shorter form. It doesn't always have to be a full-length feature sort of thing. These investigative docuseries could be fairly small, tightly packed together, really entice you, get you really interested, and then offer you an opportunity to learn more. And that's, of course, where the brand could jump in. I really think that we could hit the audience from, more than just that one angle of the branded on TV and the unbranded on TV. Why not also hit them from the streaming video side of things, where tremendous information is
right. I'm sorry. I'm just curious in terms of the 80 or so ads that are on any one time, 80 different brands that might be advertising. I think it's something like that. Maybe it's more, maybe it's slightly less. How many of them appeal to you? When you watch their ads, how many times do you say, wow, that really is a great advertisement? And what percentage are you saying would be great advertising, in your opinion?
I think in the world of branded, there's not going to be a lot. In the world of unbranded, there's always more. You only have to look at, the Cannes Lions, Cannes Health Lions, to see that what wins there is great advertising, but there's almost no branded medical advertising. Some get through occasionally, but usually it's a little video that was seen on an iPad detail somewhere. So it didn't have to have fair balance all over it. But I do think that once in a while, because we're in the business, I do sometimes see a couple of spots on TV where I go, I don't know how they got that through, well done. And I might stand in my kitchen watching it and I'm applauding the creative team and the clients because they did something really great here. I do appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree. I may not be the target, but I respect how they got there.
Yeah, exactly.
I know what it took to get there.
Yes.
I'll be honest with you. I tend to applaud some of the non-television work more so, to be honest with you. The television work to me plays a very specific purpose. It's essential in some of these categories. To me, what breaks through are often the digital work, the social work, the partnerships, the programs with patients or caregivers. That's the stuff to me that I tend to go, wow, I wish I had thought of that. That was really cool. That's really going to connect with people. It's supported by the TV advertising, but to me, it's much more invasive, in a positive way, invasive.
And it's also the specificity of knowing your audiences. When you go to those engagements, like being able to identify who you're speaking with, generate the content that really brings them in and tells that story in a longer form than just your spot, where so much of it takes place behind the scenes. I embrace that at every opportunity. And I think we talked a little bit about craft, but it's polishing every one of those engagements. Like that junior copywriter that really wrote that great line in the 12-second animation of the banner unit that he had to do it in. Like, we have to embrace all of those little pieces to really make a distinctive brand.
And I think craft is what honestly sets apart, Jim, what you're talking about, which is the non-TV work that stands out more. I think craft is much more prominent in the non-TV world. But Bob, I want to go back to something you said, which is that sea of sameness, because we've only got that 20 seconds or the 26 seconds. And I think that's a real cop-out. I do. I think we get there for a lot of reasons, but this 20 seconds is not one of them. I think that we can do better in the 20 seconds we've got. And maybe craft is one way to do it. But certainly, getting out of those lifestyle shots and people on the beach is going to be a big push.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And those are often the scenes in market research that people like. We just recently went into market research and there was an activity that was not typical, and the respondents came back with, that's not me. I don't do that. I can't picture myself doing that. So I don't like it. And out it went, and in went the, mass appeal scene that can engage and be more relatable to people. Mm-hmm. And so, that's how we get to where we are very often.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed, obviously the opportunity to be in so many different forms of media. When I was starting, it was, there was television, print, and there wasn't really much digital. We're talking about the Lipitor launch ads. It was pretty easy. I mean, from a execution standpoint, to decide what you're going to do, to understand it as a client, to make my scientific side of the client understand that the brand people who weren't exposed to any consumer work before, it wasn't that complicated. And now you've got all these choices, and everything is fragmented. You've got point of care now to add that, and as a form of DTC with fragmentation as well. I'm just wondering, from an agency standpoint, the agency world has become fragmented. I mean, you've got, it used to be the buying agency and the creative agency were generally the same. And so you kind of had one-stop shopping in terms of being a client. And now you've got the buying agencies and the digital agency buying, and you don't have an easy time from a client standpoint, at least having one-stop shopping. You may have a gatekeeper through the creative agency or your account executive, but it isn't easy. So I'm wondering, what have you observed about making the process understandable to an audience which generally doesn't do a lot of consumer advertising, doesn't have experience with consumer advertising? What are the challenges that you face in terms of a client coming to you now and trying to make it understandable to them? What advice do you have to these people who are coming with $100 million? I want to spend $100 million in this business, but I don't know much about consumer advertising. What are those challenges that you see?
I think for us, it's less about fragmented agencies and more about a much greater mix of talent on the teams, like much greater mix. Gone are the days where you have an art director, a copywriter, a brand strategist, and an account manager. Those days are gone. Now you have 4 or 5 different kinds of strategists, 5 or 6 different kinds of creatives, The business leader is much more of a business leader than just an account manager. So the mix of talent to me is what has expanded. And the challenge as an agency is, all of our challenge is finding that talent. That's like almost, the bane of our existence, is getting them and finding them and keeping them, but also getting them to work together in a cohesive way, because they each bring different perspectives and different talents to the mix, and how to get it to all work together. I find that the bigger challenge, rather than a fragmented agency sort of landscape.
So how does the client see that? Does the client see it as fragmented, or does the client see you 10 people? There used to be 3 people in a room, now there might be 15, all with an expertise that you're trying to convince a client to understand and do something.
I find clients love it. They love to be surrounded by the teams. Let's be bold. We're their most favorite part of their day. Generally, I hear that all the time. Like, this is my favorite part of the day. Like, this is the fun part of my job. They love being surrounded by these folks that have different points of view, and different angles. And like, it's exciting. It's motivating. That's why they hire agencies. Yeah.
Well, JWC had an in-house bar, I remember. So that was always fun.
Our clients,
We all have an in-house bar now. Each of us do.
Right? You're all in the house.
our clients are loving the tailored team, though, because you're right. We look at it and we say, wait, that's actually user experience and engagement strategist and a more commercial strategist. It's not actually really traditional brand work, and different types of creative. And what I'm finding is they notice when you don't have it. It becomes really clear to us, like, wait a minute, actually this need is different, and we need to start pulling from different either parts of the agency, or, to your point, Jim, we have to find them. And so and that it is a challenge, and it's also a challenge internally to put those new teams together, because we all know what that traditional team works like. And it's been, I like it, because the longer I do this, it's something new. Like, I have to think about it in different ways to put together a team for like a prescription digital therapeutic that operates like a tech company. That is a completely different model than pharma. And it's forcing us to like work differently and pull teams together differently.
I think that's probably one of the most exciting things that's going on in agencies right now. This operational bias that we used to have, where we walked into a room with the same few people. And now you really have to look at each project and say, how am I putting talent to task here? And what is going to be the formula that's going to make us move efficiently and creatively and exceptionally through this system? And it's so not one size fits all anymore. And I think our clients understand that. They embrace it. They really appreciate it. They're savvy. These are really smart people, and they know that not everything is the same, and they don't want everything to be the same. So, yes, our teams have expanded, but it's not like all those people are in the same room at the same time. We're very judicious in how we assign certain folks to certain things. So it's not like they walk into a room and say, oh my God, I have 25 people here. This is the most expensive meeting I've ever seen in my life. You tailor it appropriately. And that's when, you start to have a really confident relationship between you and the client, that you understand their needs and how to get things done.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that you're right, Lori. I think that clients see when they don't have something. They might not say, where's my user experience person, but they know they don't have a strong user experience. But I also feel like that flip side of the budgets are always an issue. Everyone wants it faster and cheaper, and where's my nimble team? So I think, making sure that they also understand that, we're working the maestro moment, we're bringing people in where needed, and it's only, the people in the room when you need it, but definitely making sure that they understand the value of those people too, because I think not all clients are that savvy. And that, I think, was the beginning of your question too, Bob, was, what do you tell people when, the fragmented moment is happening? So we've got them all, but you've got to be judicious about it for sure too.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about media split. Because I'm wondering.
Lori? I said they love that team, but by the same token, they want us to be agile.
This is what I'm saying. It's a fine line. I just wanted to put that caveat out there.
Definitely stealing the micro moments, Susan. I will footnote you.
Yeah.
Actually, can I just add to that last piece?
Sure,
Though?
go ahead.
Because there are lots of different specialists now, and we tailor teams for the job, of course. But there needs to be now, I think, some new specialists. One of the things that we have right now is something called a culture studio, because DE and I is something that a lot of our clients are really curious about. And we want to make sure that we bring with us to those initial meetings with them an understanding of DE and I, because so many of them, they want to learn more. They know that they've got problems in that area, as everybody does. We all have so much to learn. But one of the things that we do want to, get across to our clients is that it's very important to us, and we can really hold their hand and help them get through this and know how to speak to all sorts of people in the right way.
Let me talk about price, because the FDA or the government had originally decided to mandate price be disclosed in ads, and they backed off of that. But I'm wondering, from your standpoint, is there a difference in how you approach a brand that costs $100,000 a year versus $300 a year? Do you think about, does the consumer need to know that? Is there a difference in approach between a cancer ad, an infusion cancer ad, where it's 100,000 versus a cholesterol pill where it's $3 a pill once a day? I'm just wondering, because I know that's a big issue in terms of the government and Congress, and that we have these very high-priced products, and consumers should know. And but we know it's all complex, and people don't really know what they're ever going to pay, because it's all insurance and reimbursements, and it's very complicated. And that's why it probably wouldn't work to tell people that a drug's 100,000 because they never pay 100,000. So it's a long-winded way of asking the question. Do you consider the price of the drug? Because you certainly would in another consumer product. You'd consider a car that costs 100 times more than another car. You probably want to mention that somehow in the ad about price value. So I'm just wondering, how do you approach that?
I think we will bring our best game, no matter how much the drug costs.
Yeah, I think obviously you need to consider optics, but everything had better be starting with a really deep customer insight. You'd better be creating a compelling, story and narrative that basically speaks to that person. I don't think the budget dictates any of that.
No.
I think $100,000 drug in rare epilepsy is as valuable as a $3 cholesterol drug. It just depends on what the person has and how much they need it, and also what's going to be covered. But the most price sensitivity that we've seen are things where consumers are paying outright for them, and seeing what we actually, again, with PDTs, people pay out of pocket. There is no coverage. Then it gets very interesting about price transparency and how we actually communicate that to people, because you have to. That you have no choice.
Right, but you do have the barrier. I guess my question is, when you have a drug that insurance companies are going to be loath to cover it, pay it, make it on the top of the formulary, versus drugs that they're going to easily, the doctor prescribes it, it's going to know where you go, whatever your normal copay is, you pay. So that was really the point of the question: is does the consumer need to understand that more? That what I'm telling you is going to save your life also happens to be a very expensive product, which may be a lot of barriers thrown in your way to actually get that drug.
Well, I think that's the point. I think that's the point. I think the point isn't the price or the cash outlay. I think the point is, what's the journey to get to the outcome. And often the more expensive therapies, the more specialized therapies, they've got a more complicated journey. I think that's what we focus on more is what's the pathway to success, outcomes, rather than what's the cost. Because to all of our points, the importance of it, we don't differentiate importance. They're all equally important. You cannot prioritize one thing over the other, but you can understand the difference in the journey and map it out differently. Right.
Yeah, I guess my question was, does the consumer need to understand, or at least be informed, that the pathway may be more difficult for a drug that's very expensive versus a drug that's not expensive? Is that something that we as advertisers should even get ourselves involved with in any way, shape, or form?
Well, I think we are involved, just not in a television commercial. We do a ton of patient support, and we have ambassadors. And, let's say you're on a biologic, for example, we know that that biologic is going to bring some new challenges versus what an oral medicine would be. And so most of our clients, all of our clients, understand that and invest heavily in giving patients what they need to find their way through the system. And I think that is not going to be something you can really dive into in a 60-second spot filled with Fair Balance, because there's complexities there. But when you push that viewer to a digital platform where they can dive in a little bit deeper, and then you can send them emails, they have an 800 number they can contact and find, the answers are complex and they're complicated and they're individualized, and that kind of information is going to be very difficult to communicate in a commercial.
Yeah,
Okay. I want to have our audience, I'm sorry, I just want to give our audience a chance, because our producer is telling me we have a bunch of questions, and I don't want to leave our audience out of this, because they probably asked some things that I haven't asked, and I want to give them a chance. So if we can do that pretty quickly, we have about 12 minutes left. So I just want to try to, one of you probably pick it up if you're comfortable with it, and give the answer. So Jen, you want to start?
Sure. We've got 4 questions so far. The first asks, earlier in the panel, we heard about humor and making ads entertaining. Can you discuss those parameters, as this sometimes can be risky, as you don't want to be seen as making fun of a disease or people suffering from a disease?
I think that there's a lightheartedness that I think people can appreciate. And, what we were talking about earlier with the turkey, certain conditions I think are okay to be a little bit more lighthearted about. I would never think of something for oncology as being lighthearted, but if it is a condition that is not fatal and has more of a nuisance factor to it, there is an opportunity, I think, to approach it in a little bit of a lighter way. And that kind of humanity can often make people feel a little bit better about the condition in certain ways, that they're not so sick and it's not so serious, and help shed some light on the journey. And that is, I think we've used that pretty well. We did some spots for you, Krissa, that were very lighthearted, and they resonated beautifully with folks. And we have something on air now that's done very, very well for constipation. Those are conditions. You have to be mindful of the condition that you're going into and strike the right tone for that market.
There's joy in the human condition, even under duress, even when dealing with health issues. So I think one of the things to consider is always like, where's the humor coming from, right? And how can we use it to open people to new ideas about treatment and decision making? I think Kathleen's absolutely right. You have to be condition aware, right? You're not gonna bring humor into certain areas, but sensitive subject matter also, I think, benefits really well from humor. We did a series of spots for low testosterone, and just the way into it was lighthearted. And the comedy wasn't generated by the condition, it wasn't generated by the patient. It was like the absurdity of the situation. And so where does that come from? How does it feel? Does it open you to the communication, or does it close you to the communication?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the lightheartedness sometimes can indicate, hey, we get you, we understand. I think as long as it's coming from a place of compassion and connection versus making fun of somebody, it is fair game. And in fact, it's probably going to serve you well if it really does allow you to connect with the audience and make them feel like you understand them.
Yeah.
That was beautifully articulated, Susan.
Next question.
Nice.
Our
Let's get to all 4 questions. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, we've actually gotten a few more come in. So our next question asks, in regards to the discussion about early research and strategy planning for consumers ahead of a launch, can you share how often this is led by or partnered with a global marketing team versus the US team in your experience? Is there a model that you think reflects best practice?
I think it's all over the map, but There's times where it's done in conjunction with global and US and multi-market, by the way, because there's distinction there. There are times where one market's going to lead, so it starts there. There are times where it's separate teams. Sometimes it's the same team. I think it's literally a wide range. My best practice, what I've seen over and over again, is that it's always best when everybody's involved and everybody's learning at the same time, and they're learning the nuances across markets, US, multi-market, and global, and it's all being shared. That's best practices. But in terms of like sequence, order, that can change.
Okay, Jen,
That is
next one.
so true. I mean, if you know one pharma company, you know one pharma company. It's almost like every single company does it differently. But I think, again, if they're all involved, Jim, it makes a world of difference. And I mean, I genuinely cannot count the number of times where I've had to go back and reconcept and do something over because all of a sudden global weighs in, and that's not the way that we're going to go. And I am talking months of work. So I think, you know, getting everybody in the same room, always a good idea.
Okay,
And-
Jen,
Who's
next one?
leading?
All right,
I think
our next question. I'm sorry, we've got 3 more questions, so if we could just keep moving forward, I'm sorry.
That's
The next question asks, what is the role of POC advertising going forward, given the impact of COVID?
Point of care. Everything.
Mhm.
Well, the point of care options have multiplied and legitimized, whatever that word is, have become legitimate. You know, pharmacy, once thought of just a place where you pick up your prescriptions, now actually a point of care. And we're seeing the proliferation of point of care advertising and promotion there. Pop-up clinics. I mean, I've heard many people say they'll never go back to their HCP for a vaccine, because why would I go through that whole process when I could just pop in and get it done at a pop-up clinic or at a pharmacy, or now we're seeing facilities open up that just do vaccines. So I think point of care has proliferated, and I think the messaging that needs to happen there has also proliferated.
Our next question is, would you run display programmatic advertisement at sites wherever competitors are running their DTC campaigns? How does one shortlist websites for running a DTC programmatic display campaign?
By display, do we mean banners?
Probably.
Yes, we'll use that definition for this question.
I'm not a media maven, but I don't think banners are always the best use of dollars, personally. I think they're a weaker form of communication, but that's just an N of 1.
Yeah, and I think if I'm interpreting the question about whether or not you should be where your competitors are and if you should be using those places, I think here's where definitely data drives your decisions. Yeah, that should be almost all data driven. Creative obviously plays a huge role in how will it be effective in that medium, but the data will guide you. If your competitors are there and you can differentiate yourself, great. You might want to go some places where your competitors aren't, if your audience is there, to try to like have a little bit of white space. But I think it's data. I think it's data led. I don't think there's an answer other than look at the data.
Okay, next one.
Okay, thank you. Next question says, I'm curious how open agencies and clients are to changing the typical way of media buys. For example, I've always had an issue with media buy being predetermined without even knowing what the campaign is or how it would best pan out.
Yeah, I think the integration, the ongoing dialogue, and the partnership in ideating what the plan is has to come between creative, strategy, and media, like at the table together. And also knowing what the campaign is does shift where you can go and how you want to show up. And that would often change what platform you're on. And in reverse as well, if you have an audience that's really active on a particular platform or in a particular cultural space, your competitor isn't there, that should inform the creative. So having that dialogue early on in a collaborative spirit, I think that has to be happening. We see it happening often with our smaller clients who don't have the luxury of a variety of departments within their organization. So everyone has to be at the table at the same time. And we get really great results in finding open space for media and messaging at the same time by looking at that data together.
Thank you. Our next question says, I'd love to hear more about 2021 customer testing because I agree with the panelists that it hasn't changed in many years.
Consumer market research testing, yeah.
Well, I wish they had a way of testing dynamic communications, pieces of video, if you will, rather than the static ad lobs, because ad lobs really just represent a print ad. And since our clients hardly do print ads anymore, it seems crazy, testing print ads. I think we need to find a way to test a dynamic medium where things are moving. Some kind of film, video, whatever you want to call it. That's not been done yet, and it's almost unfathomable that we don't have research companies with that capability yet. Maybe there are some out there.
Any more?
I think if I interpret that question as like, what's forward-thinking research look like, I would love the ability to test the totality of a journey and how all the elements fit together to drive behavioral change and drive results. Like, we don't really have that ability. We tend to test the pieces and then try to add it up, but it's hard to test the holistic piece of the campaign.
The experience of it. The
experience of it, yeah.
The way people experience the brand is going to matter, I think, a lot more than an individual ad. So yes, well said, Jim. Well said.
Great, thank you. Our next question actually segues nicely. It says, do you recommend any tool to find out about media spend mix of your competitors like Kantar or Pathmatics, for example?
Probably beyond our scope here.
I was going to say, I can't recommend one. I call my media people.
No problem.
Okay, Jen, I think we're probably going to run out of time, Jen, at this point. So I want to take the opportunity to thank our panelists, Jim, Kathleen, Susan. I have trouble with your okay. Lori and James, it's been fascinating. I could do this for another 5 hours, and it's just great to talk creative and launch campaigns with the expert panel we've got. We'll certainly do it again in the future. So I want to thank everybody. I want to also remind everybody that we are live this year for the DTC National come October 12th to the 14th in Boston. They just told us that all restrictions will be lifted. And I would love to see you, everybody, all our BTC friends that we haven't seen in almost 2 years, shaking hands and enjoying a cocktail with me come October 12th in Boston. So that's great news from them. It's just great news for the country that everything's opening up. And I see you still all at home, as I am. But hopefully we'll all be back in our offices one of these days, and we'll be willing to travel places again and see each other. Thank you all.
Thank you.
It's been a great hour and a half. Thank you again.
Thank you. Cheers, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.